Okay, so thanks everyone for being here. Welcome, first of all. This is the Aleph group. It's a research group in analytic philosophy, broadly conceived as mainly based at the Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, but also has members from other university centers in Romania and abroad. And so we're kind of dedicated to promoting analytic philosophy in Romania. One way we do that is having these seminars, usually bi-weekly. We had a bigger break during the Easter. And so, yeah, so very happy to keep doing this. We are especially happy today because we have Sergiu Spătan as an invited speaker. Sergiu has done his PhD at the University of Hamburg. I think he's done I'm not sure it was a postdoc or something else at the Maimonides Center for Advanced Studies. And he's currently a postdoc, if I understand correctly, at the Technical University of Dresden. Sergiu is interested in epistemology mostly, but also in political philosophy, as I guess you get from today's talk. And presumably he has other interests as well that I don't know of. And so we're very happy to have Sergiu here. Sergiu is going to talk about, what was it, a metacognitive strategy for dealing with political dogmatism. I guess that's the title. So Sergiu, please, if you want to tell me after 40 minutes or so, let me know.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation, first of all, and thanks for coming. And I'm looking forward to hear what you think about my talk. First of all, I haven't received yet the PhD, so I'm basically in the final stages of submitting it.
My mistake.
But it's okay. So basically, in the meantime, I've moved to Dresden. And yes, I'm working on another project as well. So I'm super busy with everything. Let me share my screen. Okay, so metacognitive strategy for dealing with political dogmatism. Oh, wait a second. I'll have to share again so I make sure that it's with sound. Yes. So I thought, about this talk as being for a rather larger audience. So most of it is designed for it to be understood by people that don't necessarily do epistemology or philosophy, analytic philosophy of this type. But nevertheless, I do have a couple of slides that are more technical. Sorry, that are more technical, and basically I will, I will talk about those in the Q&A if you wish so. But yes, the main idea is to present a strategy for dealing with political dogmatism that can be well pursued by anybody, not only philosophers. So let me start with a case of dogmatism in general, not only political dogmatism. And this is a documentary that I recommend to you. I think you can find it on Netflix. It's called Behind the Curve. And it's basically about people who believe in flat Earth theory. And I just want to play you the trailer for the movie.
First time I ever heard about the flat earthers was, I think, when I was in space last. I can't believe I'm talking about this.
I was well versed in just about every conspiracy you can think of.
Chemtrails, 9/11.
Did you know they made up dinosaurs?
I completely solved the JFK assassination, which I'll share with you at a different day.
And then Mark said that he was a member of the Flat Earth Society. And I said, oh, Mark, what are you on to now?
This is what it is.
Excuse me, anyone ever told you the Earth is flat?
I caught his smile and he wasn't buying it.
Nobody wants to admit that they've been fooled, but it's happened to every one of us.
If you look on Google Trends, it's like spike.
There's now flat earth dating sites. I mean, we've got songs.
Why is it expanding the way it is?
Right. If you get online, you'll see so-called evidence that seems scientific, and you go, maybe they're onto something there.
Science is having a problem combating what we're doing because they don't know how to address it.
I want to believe this. This doesn't mesh with reality, so don't change my view, change reality.
Now we're doing an international conference.
It's okay to believe all this is really happening. At a conference, we want to prove there's no curvature. And if we can do that, it's game over.
Can we get to the point where it's acceptable?
So the most interesting about this, besides the sociological aspect, I think it's an excellent documentary and I definitely recommend it to you, is that some of the people that are in this flat Earth society, they actually try to do experiments by which to show that the Earth is flat. And there is this funny scene from the movie where this guy tries to, well, show that Earth doesn't have a curvature, but basically the observation is that, well, obviously it does. And then when he sees that, he's stunned. So I mean, for a few minutes, he cannot say anything. And, you know, after a while, he realizes, okay, so probably something went wrong with my experiments, probably something wrong with how I gathered my data. So it cannot be the case, right? So he definitely had an evidence, very strong evidence that the Earth is not flat, but nevertheless, he couldn't accept it. And well, I would say that this is what dogmatism is, right? So the unwillingness to engage with views that conflict with one's own beliefs. And I will, well, presumably what I'm talking about here can apply to any type of dogmatism, but I'm mostly interested in political dogmatism because, well, it's super important for us today. So obviously we will be talking about political beliefs. Shortly, my way or the highway. And you can have political dogmatism both on the right and on the left. Basically, it's everywhere. People who don't accept any kind of evidence that contradicts their very strongly held points of view. There are three common assumptions, I think, about dogmatism and about political dogmatism in general. One is that politically dogmatic people have some sort of impairment, right? There is something wrong with them. Actually, I think some of you also know this person. For the first time in my life, I met somebody who believes that the Earth is flat, and I was absolutely shocked. And I could, you know, I tried to understand what is the, you know, the background. Why did he arrive at such beliefs? And definitely there seems to be some kind of emotional problem and so on. But in general, people think that if you're dogmatic about anything, there has to be some kind of problem with you, right? And obviously, dogmatism can and should be avoided. And what we should do to persuade dogmatic people is to provide them with, you know, good, smart arguments. If we are good enough in our argumentation, then maybe we can persuade them otherwise, right? I believe those assumptions are mostly false, incorrect. I think that many political dogmatic people do not have an impairment. Actually, I think that most of us, if not all of us, are dogmatic in one way or another. And political dogmatism cannot always be avoided. Furthermore, sometimes it is actually good. But we should strive to learn how to deal with political dogmatism. And basically what I propose is a metacognitive strategy that is inspired by skepticism about knowledge. And ultimately, I think this should be a part of a comprehensive metacognitive training in school. I will come back to what metacognition means. Okay, so first I want to talk about David Hume, who I adore and I think is a great example for philosophy, philosophizing, and for this topic as well. Then I want to, inspired by David Hume, I want to propose a theory of the feeling of certainty that, well, I talk about in my thesis as well, and which I think can offer a good background for a strategy for dealing with political dogmatism. So let me start with Hume. He is one of my philosophical heroes, a wonderful human being. Unlike many other philosophers, he was super empathetic and joyful, had many friends. He used to, really live the life. And obviously, he also wrote superb works of philosophy. And he talked about dogmatism, and he thought that we can answer to dogmatism by being skeptics. So let me actually read some of his some of the things that he wrote. I think they are super nice also because the literature is superb. Okay, so first, from an inquiry concerning human understanding, he talks about dogmatism. The greater part of mankind are naturally apt to be affirmative and dogmatical in their opinions. And while they see objects only on one side and have no idea of any counterposing argument, they throw themselves precipitately into the principles to which they're inclined, nor have they any indulgence for those who entertain opposite sentiments. To hesitate or balance perplexes their understanding, checks their passion, and suspends their action. They are, therefore, impatient till they escape from a state which to them is so uneasy, and they think that they can never remove themselves far enough from it by the violence of their affirmations and obstinacy of their belief. Absolutely superb, right? And then he continues, what's the solution for this? But could such dogmatical reasoners become sensible of the strange infirmities of human understanding, even in its most perfect state, and when most accurate and cautious in its determinations, such a reflection would naturally inspire them with more modesty and reserve, and diminish their fond opinion of themselves, and their prejudice against antagonists. The illiterate may reflect on the disposition of the learned, who, amidst all the advantages of study and reflection, are commonly still diffident in their determinations. And if any of the learned be inclined from their natural temper to haughtiness and obstinacy, a small tincture of Pyrrhonism might abate their pride by showing them that the few advantages which they may have attained over their fellows are but inconsiderable if compared with the universal perplexity and confusion which is inherent in human nature. And he ends, in general, there is a degree of doubt and caution and modesty which, in all kinds of scrutiny and decision, ought forever to accompany a just reasoner. And this basically is what he calls mitigated skepticism, right? This is not extreme type of skepticism, which he calls Pyrrhonism, not excessive skepticism, but rather, type of skepticism that is corrected, as he put it, by common sense and reflection. Okay, so what is skepticism? In general, I want to talk about skepticism about knowledge. So the main claim of skepticism is that humans know very little, if anything at all, about the external world. And the main argument for that is, well, because knowledge presupposes infallible justification, and we are short of that. We can never have infallible justification, even for the most common believed propositions, right? A classical argument for skepticism, this comes from Descartes, not from Hume, but I think it's very well known, and I should just go through it. Think about the Matrix, right? The movie Matrix. So there is this hypothesis that you might live in a crazy world like in a Matrix, where you are in a brain of it. You don't actually exist in the real world as you know it. And then the problem is that if I do not know that I'm not a handless brain of it, like in a Matrix, then I do not know that I have hands, right? Because in that world, I do not have hands. I do not know that I'm not a handless brain of it, therefore I do not know that I have hands. Okay, this is for philosophy students, this is philosophy 101. But the idea is that the problem with our justification is that we cannot refute this type of extreme examples of skeptical scenarios. And if we cannot do that, then we do not have infallible justification. And well, the skeptics think that knowledge presupposes infallible justification. It is important to distinguish between skepticism about knowledge and skepticism about justification. Basically, what I argued for above is a type of skepticism about knowledge. So we do have different grades of justification. Nevertheless, we do not have the highest type of justification, which is needed for knowledge, right? So we might still be more justified in some beliefs than in others, but we are never justified infallibly in any of our beliefs. So we never possess knowledge. Okay, this is skepticism. In general, Hume talks about different types of skepticism. Sorry, I think there. Okay, there was a message. Different types of skepticism. I won't go into that. Many of you probably know about his criticism of inductive reasoning, cause and effect, and so on. The point is that, well, Hume is a skeptic, but he also has a very nice description of what skepticism can do to us. And I want to read that as well, because I think it's very important for our solution to how to deal with dogmatism, as I will explain later. So here is Hume from the treatise talking about, the way he deals with skepticism. And he starts with the awful situation you find yourself in when you think about these skeptical scenarios. Where am I, or what? From what causes do I derive my existence, and to what condition shall I return? I am confounded with all these questions and begin to fancy myself in the most deplorable condition imaginable, environed with the deepest darkness and utterly deprived of the use of every member and faculty. As you can see, skepticism is really daunting, right? But then what happens is something absolutely astonishing. Most fortunately, it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, nature herself suffices to that purpose and cures me of this philosophical melancholy and delirium, either by relaxing this bent of mind or by some avocation and lively impression of my senses, which obliterate all the chimeras. I dine, I play a game of backgammon, I converse, and I marry with my friends. And when, after 3 or 4 hours amusement, I would return to these speculations, so the skeptical speculations, they appear so cold and strained and ridiculous that I cannot find in my heart to enter into them any further. I think this is actually the key for understanding how skepticism affects us and how we can deal with dogmatism, but at the same time not get crazy, because skepticism is such a crazy position, right? So in summary, Hume accepts this type of mitigated skepticism. Nevertheless, he says that nature always brings us back to the day-to-day convictions. And in order to avoid the pitfalls of dogmatism, we should always keep skepticism in mind. As Barry Stroud says, having a skeptical way of life is what Hume proposes here. Basically, what I want to do in the rest of the talk is to, explain my own view about how we can accommodate Hume in the 21st century, and try to, translate Hume in other words and try to apply it more concretely, I guess. So first I want to say a few words about where this comes from. In my PhD thesis, which is called "How to Be a Skeptic: A Defense of Certainty-Based Inferentism," I basically try to try to argue that skepticism is not such a crazy position. And I do that by explaining how our knowledge descriptions are associated with the scriber's feeling of certainty, and therefore why we cannot not say that we know many of the steps that we think that we know, because we cannot get rid of the feeling of certainty. And I will explain in a minute why. And in order to do that, to defend that thesis, I put forward a metacognitive theory of the feelings of confidence, doubt, and certainty, which I called doxastic epistemic feelings. And basically what I want to do now is to say a few words about that theory. I won't have time to present all of it, but I think, think about it in this way. This is an opinionated introduction to how we form beliefs and revise beliefs, coming from my own story. So let me say a few words about the ontology of believing. How do we come to believe stuff, and to revise our beliefs, and then to introduce this feeling of certainty and its role in forming beliefs, and then to talk about metacognitive sensibility, which is a key concept for my strategy. So what are beliefs? I assume a rather classical representational theory of beliefs. For those who don't know what that is, basic beliefs are propositional attitudes. They are attitudes about propositions, representing facts about the world that the subject takes to be true. To believe that P is to register the representation of P in one's system of representations that one regards as true. P is a random proposition, like, for example, the proposition that there is a banana in front of me, in front of my eyes, and it is yellow. I forgot to bring a banana, sorry for that, but I did use a photo of banana here, so you get a point. So basically believing that there is a banana in front of my eyes is to represent reality in such a way that, you have a representation of the world with the banana in front of your eyes, and the banana is yellow, and you think, that this is true. You take that to be true. What is the role of beliefs? Well, first of all, they form a web of beliefs, as Quine used to say, or a system of beliefs. I don't only believe that there's a yellow banana in front of my eyes. I also believe that there are, these are fruits and they are tasty. And then I have thousands of other beliefs about the external world and thousands of other beliefs about myself and about others and so on. And all of these beliefs presumably form a coherent system, and that's our web of beliefs. I think the representation is pretty cute. So the role of beliefs is to form this coherent representation of reality, but also to form a base for our reasoning and for especially our practical reasoning, right? So I cannot act in any way if I don't have beliefs about how reality works and how reality is. So if I want to eat a banana, obviously I have to base my actions, namely to peel it and so on the assumption that it is true that there is a banana in front of me and so on. This is important, and I'll come back to this. So the role of beliefs is, especially for the base for practical reasoning. And I will say why epistemic emotions and the feeling of certainty has different roles. So how do we form and revise beliefs? And that simple picture would be something like, you have a prima facie evidence for P. That is, a reason for you to believe that P, and a cause for your belief that P, right? So if I see the banana, that is evidence that there is a banana in front of me. And, if I see that the banana is yellow, then that is evidence that the banana is yellow. And I end up believing that there is a yellow banana in front of me. And I enter that representation in my system of representations. That's super basic, yes? Now, how do I revise my belief? Well, presumably when I encounter evidence against the target proposition, in this case that there is a yellow banana in front of me, I could do three things, right? So I could believe that non-P. So let's say that the proposition is that the banana is yellow. So I would believe that it's not yellow. I would suspend judgment. I'm not sure if this is green or yellow. So I would just suspend judgment on this issue. Or I could hold a partial belief or credence. Or the way I like to put it, a belief with probabilistic content. We can come back to this if you want. I'll be skeptical of the whole. Well, I kind of defend, for those people in the audience who know this literature, I defend a belief first theory of credence. And in that sense, partial beliefs are beliefs with probabilistic content. But again, this is rather technical. So think about partial belief as, not full belief, not wholly believing in P, but rather believing with a certain probability. Think about, how strongly do you believe that it will rain today when you see the forecast and you see that it's 70% probable that it will rain. Well, you believe that it is 70% probable that it will be rain. You don't fully believe that it will rain, right? So that's a partial belief that it will rain. And yeah, so that's kind of some ways in which you can revise your beliefs based on the evidence, on counter evidence to the target proposition. So I could, on this graph, I could replace the yellow banana with the belief in a yellow banana with a belief in a green banana, or I could not have any beliefs whatsoever about the topic, or I could have a partial belief. Obviously, I didn't say that, but you can also start with a partial belief. So you can form from the very beginning a partial belief if you have objective probabilities that you are, you read about objective probabilities. I'll come back to that. Okay, now what's dogmatism? Well, dogmatic people have a difficulty revising their web of beliefs when posed with counter evidence, right? So, or even admitting that that is counter evidence. So think about people who still think that Trump is the president and Biden is illegitimate, right? Even if they are posed with countless counter evidence to this claim, they just cannot take that counter evidence seriously, and they don't revise their web of beliefs. So they are dogmatic in the fact that they don't allow for the counter evidence to affect their web of beliefs. That's dogmatism, right? Now I want to that's, again, another way of defining, kind of the same way of defining dogmatism, but I want to explain how we can deal with dogmatism. And for that, I want to deal, to get into my own account of how we form actually beliefs, and say a few words about what this feeling of certainty is. So let's go back to how I formed the belief that there is a banana in front of me, yes, a yellow banana. So I have prima facie evidence. I see the banana, right? And in the end, I will end up believing that there is a banana. But how long should I stare at the banana before believing that there is a yellow banana in front of me? How much cognitive resources should I spend until I form the belief, until I enter this representation in my web of beliefs? I think that metacognition is the answer here. So there is this metacognitive stopping mechanism, which is the feeling of certainty, which tells me how much cognitive resources I need to invest until I crystallize on belief. And basically, the feeling of certainty is the stopping point. So it tells me, look, you don't have to look for more than a couple of milliseconds in order to form this belief, because you don't want to spend all your cognitive resources on this. You have limited cognitive resources, so you should go on, move on. You should already believe that there's a yellow banana in front. Okay, let's go a step back and talk a bit about metacognition. So what is metacognition? It sounds like a complicated word, but the idea is pretty simple. So there are two presumably layers of cognition, first order cognition and then second order cognition, which is metacognition. And basically, this is that part of our mind that monitors, evaluates, and regulates first order cognitive states. So for example, the believing that your first order belief is justified. So the content of a second order cognition is first order cognition. And basically the aim of metacognition is to regulate our first order cognitions and to manage our cognitive resources. And in the literature, they talk a lot about epistemic emotions or metacognitive emotions. Probably the easiest one to grasp is the tip of the tongue feeling. When you feel like you know the answer to a question, but you cannot really recollect it. For example, what was the real name of Mark Twain? Maybe some of you know the answers, others think that they know, but it's not there yet. So it's on the tip of your tongue. This is a metacognitive feeling because, well, the content of this feeling is a first order cognition, right? It's your memory, and you basically evaluate yourself whether you have this piece of memory or not. And other metacognitive emotions include surprise, curiosity, the feeling of forgetting, familiarity, and many others. I won't get into details of why these are metacognitive. I only want to talk about the ones that I think are crucial for the way we form our beliefs and revise them. And those are the feelings of confidence, doubt, and certainty. And basically what I claim is that the feeling of certainty is metacognitive. So it is about our beliefs. And it is a metacognitive mechanism that tells us when we should stop inquiry and settle on a crystallized belief. So formally, if S is a subject, right, an agent, anyone, feels certain that P, then S assesses that her evidence with regard to P fully supports the belief that P, and that therefore believing that P is maximally epistemically fitting. So I'll go again through this. Important definition. For somebody to feel certain that P, it has to be the case that that person assesses that her evidence, that her epistemic position with regard to P fully supports the belief that P. So this is a judgment, a metacognitive judgment about how much our beliefs are supported. And you feel certain that P only when you think that believing that P is maximally epistemically fitting. If you think that it's not maximally epistemically fitting, well, you don't feel certain that P, so you feel at least slightly uncertain. And indeed, the feeling of uncertainty is the mechanism, the metacognitive mechanism that tells us when we should continue inquiry and invest more cognitive resources on the issue at hand. So if S feels uncertain at P, then S assesses that her evidence with regard to P does not fully support the belief that P, and that therefore believing that P is not maximally epistemically fitting. Importantly, the feeling of uncertainty, unlike the feeling of certainty, is gradual, right? So you can feel more or less uncertain that P, and maybe this can help. This is, the feeling of certainty that P, and then if you think that the epistemic position that you have does not fully support the belief that P, then you might, start feeling more and more doubtful the less and less you think that epistemic position supports believing that P, right? And in that sense, the feeling of confidence basically is, just the other side of the same coin of the feeling of uncertainty. And it points to how much epistemic support the agent thinks that believing that P has. And basically the feeling of certainty is the highest form of the feeling of confidence and the total lack of the feeling of doubt. Importantly, the feeling of certainty is binary, so you either have it or you lack it, while the feeling of uncertainty is gradual. Again, the main idea, the main role of epistemic emotions like this one is to manage our cognitive resources. So they tell us how much the target belief is supported by our evidence, right? I have a few slides that I will not go through because they're a bit more technical. And if you have questions about those, I can come back. But I don't want to get into too many details. So this is a graph about the difference between first-order epistemic evaluations and second-order epistemic evaluations, and what's the role of evidential probability in our judgments in our metacognitive judgments. I can come back to that. This is a slide about other features of the depths of these epistemic emotions. There are nice studies about behavioral and phenomenal and physiological components. Again, I can come back to this if you want. I also have a few arguments for why I defend the metacognitive account of the feeling of certainty. And here is a slide where and also a paper I base this on, in which I try to argue against prominent position from the literature from Peter Carothers, who argues for a non-metacognitive account. Again, I can come back to this. But sorry. The general idea is that in my account, the feeling of certainty signals the end of inquiry, the appropriate point for believing, while the feeling of uncertainty signals that inquiry should continue. So if we go back to how we form beliefs and how we revise beliefs, basically the schema is something like this. We have prima facie evidence for P, which makes us feel certain that P, which that's a signal for believing that P, so we end up believing that P. And when we come up with counter evidence to P, then hopefully this leads us to feeling doubtful about P, which leads us to revising the belief that P in different ways, as I mentioned before. Again, the upshot of all of this is that the role of beliefs is to have representations of reality on which to base our reasoning, and especially practical reasoning, while the role of the depths is to manage our cognitive resources and to regulate our doxastic attitudes, like believing, suspending, and so on. That's pretty important for the whole picture, and I will explain how it can affect what we end up believing. The idea is that again, somebody who's dogmatic about President Trump still being president cannot accept counter evidence and does not feel doubtful about this, right? So he just cannot stop feeling certain that Trump is still president. And that is important because I think we can improve, we can accommodate, we can deal better with dogmatism if we understand, if we are, metacognitively sensible, as I call it. So this is a crucial concept that I want to introduce, and it's central for my strategy as well. Metacognitive sensibility. First, from what I said, from an epistemological point of view, strictly speaking, we should never feel certain about anything. And given that the feeling of certainty I argued, is the mechanism that helps us arrive at beliefs. We should never believe anything. That's skepticism, right? That's Pyrrhonism, actually. And that's the worst type of skepticism. We cannot live with, according to this type of skepticism, right? And that's why Hume basically distances himself from Pyrrhonism, and that's what I want to do as well. So the fact is that we do hold beliefs, and we do so because these beliefs are practically fitting for us. So here I want to introduce this concept of practical fittingness. Before I mentioned epistemic fittingness, which refers to how much the evidence we have supports the target belief. And here I want to introduce the concept of practical fittingness. So again, SS belief that B is epistemically fitting, if and only if SS evidence supports holding that belief, while SS belief that B is practically fitting, if and only if believing, sorry, without this it, believing that B fulfills SS practical aims, right? So one of our aims is obviously to survive. And in order to do that, we obviously want to have representations of reality on which we can base our practical reasoning, right? So we do need to hold beliefs about food and about what we should, drink and so on, and also about our hands. So the famous hands argument from Moore. I look at my hands and I cannot stop not feeling certain that I have two hands, right? I simply cannot. I mean, no matter how much I try, and I tried, believe me, I cannot stop feeling. I cannot stop feeling certain that I have hands. I just cannot. It is too important for me to continue to hold this belief. So there is this pressure to feel certain that I have hands. And this, I think, also explains Hume's quote from before, right? It happens that since reason is capable of dispelling these clouds, nature herself suffices to that purpose and cures me of this philosophical melancholy and so on. So basically, there is this pressure on our cognitive system so that we do feel certain about many things. We couldn't survive otherwise. We just couldn't. And that's all right. Okay, it's absolutely all right to do so, or at least sometimes, because other times. What is practical fitting is just to hold the craziest belief, right? So this guy, especially if you watch the documentary, he's both cute and frightening, I think, because this is his world. I mean, this is everything for him. He cannot live outside this world of the flat Earth society. He met his girlfriend there, he met all his friends there, he was living with his mother until 40, something like that. And then, this gave meaning to his life. So believing that the earth is flat is not something that you can refute with a simple experiment. This is a matter of life and death for him. So there's a lot of practical fittingness in this belief. So there's a lot of pressure for him to not to feel doubt about the fact that the earth is flat. And so there are many other instances, right? So these guys went to the capital and attacked the capital. For them, this is part of their identity, obviously. I mean, this is, again, who they are, presumably. So political ideology, we know it so often, we see it everywhere, that is crucial for what we are. And it puts a lot of pressure on how we deal with evidence and counter evidence. So what is metacognitive sensibility? Let's consider again let's consider the following three sentences. I have two hands. I will not commit any errors in my inaugural speech at the book club tonight, whatever, some low-key speech at the book club. And then the third one, the 2020 US elections were rigged by the Democrats, right? So Biden is not president. You might think, look, given what I said before, it seems appropriate to feel certain that A, or to feel overconfident that B, or even certain that B, but not appropriate to feel certain that C. So why? Why is that the case? And here I want to explain what's happening here. First of all, please notice that all three of these beliefs are practically fitting for the person, right? So If I'm overconfident in my speech abilities, then presumably I might go, give a better speech. And also, I mentioned before why having this crazy political belief is might be practically fitting for those people. So all of them are practically fitting. Nevertheless, I would say feeling certain that A or that B is morally benign, while feeling certain that C, on the other hand, is morally malign. So I want to make this distinction. Proposition attitude, like believing, is morally malign when holding that attitude tends to lead to the subject to harmful actions. And proposition attitude is benign when it doesn't tend to lead to harmful actions. So think about a racist belief. If the person, well, at least this is my account, okay, my idea about what's happening here. Other people might have different theories about this, but racist belief is immoral because it tends to lead to harmful actions, not because the belief itself, but to what beliefs can tend to lead, right? And similarly here, believing that the US elections were rigged by the Democrats can and did lead to harmful actions, while feeling overconfident about one's speech at the book club. Come on. Anyhow, I won't get into more details about this, but I have in my paper I have lots of examples in which I think that this explanation accounts for why in some cases we have the we assess the agents as holding the right type of attitude, and while in others not. Okay, sorry, I'm a bit late, so I'll go fast forward to it. So this is epistemic norm, as we like to do it in philosophy, in epistemology, which says that the subject is permitted to feel certain that B is, if believing that B is maximally epistemically fitting. That's the first obvious. Sorry, I made a typo here. It should have been has probability 1. But anyhow, I don't want to get to details. This is rather technical, actually. So I just want to say that metacognitive sensitivity is when you follow all the epistemic norms, including the strictest one. So when you're skeptic, basically, while metacognitive sensibility is following the most epistemic norms and the one in which you take into consideration also these practical fitting aspects and moral aspects. So what I claim we should do is to try to make metacognitive sensible, right? So we should, when we form our beliefs, we should think about features that might affect what we believe. I'm not saying I'm not a voluntarist about belief forming here, because I think whether we form belief or not, whether we end up feeling certain or not, is not up to us necessarily. We don't control the judgment itself, the metacognitive judgment itself, but we do control what we think about when we make the judgment. And what we can control is, being aware how harmful one attitude might be. And if we think about that, and if we think about our motivation for holding one belief or another, our desires, our needs, our emotional needs, that might actually help us in avoiding these bad cases, right? So what I'm basically arguing is good old metacognition knowledge, right? So know thyself, understand your needs, understand your emotions, and why you might, be biased. So yeah, basically the strategy is pretty simple. I want to say a few words about the background, about metacognition, but I don't have time. Anyhow, so maybe I should, because yeah. So metacognition is very important in psychology and in pedagogical studies, because it was shown that it helps students a lot with learning. Knowing how to learn obviously helps a lot with learning. So there are lots of studies about how to improve metacognition in children and students. And there are these 3 aspects that are important: metacognitive knowledge, monitoring, and control. So think about learning the capitals of countries, right? So Metacognitive knowledge basically means that you know about yourself how well you can learn stuff, right? So you know what are your habits, you know what are the mechanisms that help you, and so on, or the mnemotechniques, for example. While metacognitive monitoring is basically monitoring, which countries did you learn by now, which you didn't, how much do you still need to focus on what, right? So you monitor your cognitive processes, while metacognitive control obviously refers to the ability to change from one topic to the other, to the one that you already know to the other one that you don't yet know. So these are super important for learning. These are done in many developed school systems. And what I basically want to do is to propose that we consider also developing metacognitive sensibility to similar mechanisms, right? So I start with a simple heuristic, which is kind of, it's kind of evident after what I said until now. So 3 steps, right? How to deal with political dogmatism, 3 steps. So first step is the skeptical one. Always remind oneself that strictly speaking, almost no feeling of certainty is legitimate. Almost because maybe, I don't know, mathematical propositions and so on, it might be legitimate to feel certain about those, but about the external world, almost none are legitimate. While one's depths are influenced by both epistemic and practical considerations, from a strict epistemological point of view, almost none of one's beliefs should be held with certainty. So this is the skeptical stage, right? Hume talks about that, right? It's so crucial because, and I really want to emphasize this, because from the inside, all of our beliefs seem to be, appropriate. That's why we believe them, because at a certain point we felt certain about them, right? These people that believe in Biden not being the president, from the inside, it feels natural to feel certain about this, right? So you have to start with the assumption that none of our beliefs are such that we should be certain about them. And then step 2 is to discriminate between the epistemic and the non-epistemic considerations that might have influenced your depths, right? So you just need to be aware of yourself, or of your needs, of your emotions, of the desires that you have, of the ideological identity that you need, and so on. Well, step 3 is to control one's depth such that to do justice to the verbal evidence and at the same time allow for deviations from the epistemic norms, only if those deviations are beneficial to the agent and do not tend to lead to any bad moral consequences, as I mentioned above. So basically, try to be metacognitive sensible. So at the end of this heuristic, you end up with with A and B, but you should stop feeling certain in C. And why is that? Because, well, C can lead to harmful actions. How to develop metacognitive sensibility? Well, this is education, right? So these are the 3 elements that I mentioned before. I won't go into details, but I have in the paper where I talk about this, I have also came up with exercises for how to develop these abilities for improving metacognitive knowledge, about learning about the depths and skepticism and so on. How to improve metacognitive monitoring. I came up with some exercises that you might do in class. The same with metacognitive control. I won't get into details. If you want, I can come back. In general, what I think must be done is, well, education reform. The training of metacognitive sensibility should be part of an education focused on metacognition. I strongly believe in this, and developing metacognitive abilities in students. Some of the books that I'm very attached to talk about how to do education reform, and basically all of them mention the importance of this kind of abilities, metacognitive abilities. And I would argue that metacognitive abilities, when it comes to the depths, are crucial, and especially in a world as the one we live now, where fake news is everywhere and where, well, yeah, disinformation is everywhere. So what I want to do in the future is to, well, obviously fine-tune the theoretical framework, and then to develop, test, and certify some pedagogical tools that are connected to this. And yes, this is a long-term project, but also a long-term strategy. So what I mean, it's absolutely almost impossible to think that somebody who believes in some kind of crazy things and starts with my algorithm will instantly stop being dogmatic. No, I don't think it works like that. I think you need a lot of investment in education and in the educational system. But I do believe that we have to think about this already. And the solution for dealing with dogmatism is not just to tell people that they are stupid and they don't understand stuff and try to come up with arguments to convince them, because that almost never works, right? So what you need, I think, is to push on this kind of knowledge, of metacognitive knowledge. Try to understand your needs and your desires and the non-epistemic factors that might influence your epistemic evaluations, because at the end of the day we are all dogmatic. That's kind of the point, right? When I believe that, when I feel certain that I have hands, I do so because I need to have that feeling of certainty. And if we are all dogmatic, we should be more understanding with each other. We are fallible human beings, and we should understand that. That's a starting point, actually, for all our discussions. And dialogue, in that sense, in liberal democracy, is so important, because as fallible beings, we need to get in dialogue with each other and try to understand each other, and not just to stigmatize each other. So I think, basically, I'm really not saying anything new. It's good old Hume and good old Aristotle and good old Socrates who said, know thyself, just try to understand yourself. And that's how you start to do some social change as well. I wanted to end, I don't have time for the movie, but I want to end with a recommendation. This is a great movie from the 50s, 12 Angry Men, where, it's kind of the illustration of what I tried to say. You might know the movie, so it's basically, there are 12 jurors who talk about whether to convict or not a person of color. That's kind of an important point. And only this guy, Fonda, the director, is the only juror who thinks from the very beginning that the guy might not be guilty, might not be. So he has doubts. And all the others are super convinced that he is guilty. And then during the movie, what happens is that they have, this long dialogue, sometimes very emotional, very tensed, where, you probably, I don't want to give spoilers, but you kind of know what will happen, right? So in the end, step by step, quite many of them change their minds. And it happens not because, also because they are convinced by the evidence, but most importantly, because they realize why, until that point, they were so convinced that the guy is guilty. So this guy in the center, he's like the angriest of the 12 angry men. And he quits, he's the last one who admit that the guy is not guilty. And he does that after he realizes why he thought that the guy is guilty, basically racism and some psychological needs and blah, blah. All those things that we need to understand about ourselves if we want to live with each other better lives. Okay, thank you. That was it.
Great, thank you, Sergiu, for this very rich talk. We're gonna open up the floor now, so please raise your virtual hand. I think you find it at reactions, the bottom line. Okay, so we already have Mihai. You can like type in chat that you have a question or follow-up. That's okay too. So okay, let's start with Mihai. Mihai, please.
So thank you very much for a very interesting talk, Sergiu, and be sure to send me the paper on which this talk is based, because I'm quite interested in your solutions and in your results. and I'm quite interested in following up on your research. Well, I was wondering, this was touched on at the end of your talk. There's a difference, however, when I talk about metacognitive learning and metacognitive strategies. And well, the problem is that it's one thing to teach this, and it is perhaps very effective to teach this to kids, to children up until a certain age, but the same strategies may not apply to adults. So that's the problem, because we would want to mitigate, we want to reject harmful conspiracy theories or fake news, not only in relation to the future generations. We would want to put an end, or at least to reduce their harmful effects now. In this generation, let's say. And well, it seems to me that the same metacognitive strategies are much less likely to work in the case of adults, because, well, adults are more dogmatic, they're more stable in their beliefs than children. And there is also the importance of the social networks they are involved in, because many times there is this phenomenon of cascade information or reputational cascade that actually leads to many of them adopting a certain belief or believing a conspiracy theory. But when that belief is stabilized, it is very hard. Some authors claim that it is even detrimental to try to intervene and to de-inoculate that person, that belief from that person. So do you have some hints, some ideas about what we can do in relation to adults, like the adults that you presented, sort of you used as an example for your talk? Thank you.
Thanks, Mihai. Excellent question. I think yes, a very important one and obvious problem. Yes, I mean, in principle, the whole thing is not targeting people who don't want to be targeted. Let's put it like this, right? So I don't think it's that useful to try to convince adults who already are entrenched in their positions to change their minds. I think that's one of the points that I want to make, that it's rather difficult to change people's minds and try to come up with arguments against their position. So, you know, being arrogant and telling them, look, you don't know yourself that well and you should try to know yourself better, and I think it doesn't work any better. What I do think that is important, though, is when you get into dialogue with people that have different opinions from yours, and you get convinced by what I said, let's say. I mean, again, it's not that new. So many philosophers talk about this kind of knowledge of yourself. But if you really believe in this framework, then presumably when you engage with people that are very convinced of their position, you try to be more moderate yourself, right? And you try to be more understanding, and you try to to get into dialogue from a different perspective than somebody who starts from the conviction that I'm right and you are wrong, and things have to be the way I think, right? So what I would say is that when you engage with adults, you cannot really change them. That's true. You need long time for this strategy to work out, but you can have the type of attitude that is helpful for having a better results, basically, from the dialogue, ending up maybe not changing their mind, but trying to to be understanding, sorry. And from my experience, I would say this is much better than just getting into conflict. And yeah, so I would say that's a possible answer. But then then again, write a book, send it to people, and maybe they would, they would buy the argument, even if not immediately. They might not change their mind, but thinking about these things, not being convinced by somebody you talk to, but rather thinking abstractly about these things might help people. For instance, I was helped by reading Hume and reading these great minds of the past.
Okay, Elena. Sorry, Mihai, did you want to?
No. Just thanking Sergiu for his answer. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, Elena next.
This is basically in relation to the earlier question, particularly the social aspects to this. And yes, I'm referring also to adults rather than children here. I think dogmatism is often connected to trust or lack of trust, particularly in your example with Republicans and Democrats. So people would distrust valid evidence just because it's, let's say, written in a newspaper that they associate with the other group. So yeah, particularly in cases of polarization. So I was wondering if your view could connect in any way to trust, or whether this metacognitive approach could also, because trust does have an epistemic component as well. So yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how the two could connect.
Thanks. I didn't think yet about it, but what I do hope that my account helps more than other accounts is because is with focusing on the fact that these are epistemic emotions, right? So these are affects to begin with, right? And surely there is some kind of interconnection when it comes to affects, much more than when it comes to affects and cognitive states that are not affects, right? So presumably there is some influence of other emotions as well on metacognitive emotions, on metacognitive feelings, and I would definitely put trust there. I did not think yet exactly how I should conceptualize this, but surely trust should have a central stage there. I think Grundmann talks about trust a lot, and then also in political philosophy, Nussbaum talks about trust a lot, and it's such an important emotion when it comes to citizens and citizen involvement. So thank you. I should think more about these things.
Just a small follow-up, comment rather than a question. I think you're on the same page with people who talk about trust on the issue of saying that instead of calling people ignorant, and just pointing the evidence, this is the evidence, you should believe X, otherwise it means you're ignorant, not capable enough, and so on. So people who would support trust would say that, again, that's not the right approach to trying to change people's minds. I think there's a point of convergence there.
Sure. I mean, basically, you try to by having this more humane attitude, I would say, you try to change the object of trust from the usual suspect to somebody else who's not an enemy. It's just a person who understands the fallibility of human beings. Thanks.
Bettina, please.
I think to me, kind of the most important aspect of your presentation was the distinction between epistemic and non-epistemic influences on feelings of certainty. And I can see how providing opportunities for young people to be more aware of those distinctions could be really, really beneficial and could reduce the risk of dogmatism. As others have said, it's more difficult with adults. So that part I found really persuasive. What I'm less persuaded of is the connection you see between harmful actions and the quality of propositional attitudes to certainty. So you basically seem to be saying that a propositional attitude is morally malign if it's is likely to lead to harmful actions. Now, I may have misunderstood this, but I don't think the connection is as close as you may assume. I just one fairly random, but still, I think it makes the point. Fairly random example came to my mind. A scientist investigating the nature of nuclear reactions. They may have reached a point at which they were as certain as anyone can be that they'd understood how this works. How that is then used, that understanding is then used, to me, it really is a separate issue. So the attitude of certainty with regard to, or at least relative certainty, with regard to how nuclear reactions work, to me, is not in itself morally anything. It's purely epistemic. And the fact that that knowledge was then used to construct and detonate atomic nuclear bombs that's a moral issue.
Yes, great, thanks. Yeah, I thought about this, and I think part of my answer would have to include a bit of the story that I didn't present, namely what exactly is happening when we form beliefs, and how exactly does the non-epistemic factors influence this process? Because you might have different ways, right, to think about it. And I think quite many people in epistemology, when it comes to pragmatic encroachment, if you know that debate, think that we end up forming a certain belief or judgment about knowledge by including these two types of factors in our deliberation, right? So we include epistemic factors, and then we include non-epistemic factors, and then we decide, well, given these two types of factors, we decide kind of, we should claim that we know stuff or we should believe stuff. And what this picture entails is that basically these concepts are not purely epistemic, but are epistemically practical, right? So they have, that's kind of the idea of pragmatic encroachment, right? So the practical factors are essential in the judgments by which we arrive at beliefs or at judgments about knowledge. And I do not accept that kind of picture. What I say is that the evaluations, the judgments by which we form beliefs or judgments about knowledge are purely epistemic. So when I end up feeling certain that P, I do so because I evaluate that the belief that P is maximally epistemically fitting, right? So that's an epistemic evaluation. But what happens is that there are these external factors that influence, that puts pressure basically on my epistemic evaluation. Think about it in the following way. So I use this analogy. I'm not sure if it's helpful, so please let me know. Think about a professor who's in the evaluation committee for admitting students in the police academy, right? And then she has a nephew, let's say, who's very close to her, and he wants to get into academy, and she evaluates him, and he's not the best. I mean, strictly speaking, objectively speaking, he should not be in the academy, right? So let's say objectively speaking, he deserves the grade 4 on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is the best. And the threshold usually it's I don't know, at 7, right? So he deserves 4. The threshold is at 7, and then what happens is that the professor, being so closely connected to her nephew, wants him to get admitted into academy. So she has two options, right? So there are two options on the table. Either somehow she changes the system such that a grade of 4 is sufficient to get into academy. That's the threshold. That's the new threshold. By her power, she instates this new threshold. Or she might, because she has this emotional connection to her nephew, she might end up thinking, honestly thinking, that he deserves 7, right? So the first option is basically what pragmatic encroachers do. They think that the threshold itself changes with practical factors as well, right? So the threshold for what counts as certainty worthy is not only epistemic but also practical. While the option that I support says that, well, no. The threshold is always the same, is always epistemic, but unbeknownst to an agent, she might be influenced, she might be pressed by these practical factors to end up feeling certain, right? So sorry for the long introduction, but basically that I thought that was relevant for the question, because I think what happens here is that when it comes to these scientists who think about what's the truth, it might be that these practical factors influence them, not knowing about the whole thing, right? So the influence is basically a pressure, an external pressure, and well, what happens here? I mean, given that it's science, obviously they end up feeling certain that P only if they have super good justification for P, right? So so in this case, they do not think about, so to say, what the practical factors might be. They just think about the truth, and if the practical factors put pressure on them, then that will happen. But if not. I know if that helps, but I thought that it's important to talk about that.
Could I just quickly follow up on that? What you've just said might help in some examples of people who believe in conspiracy theories. If you consider the accounts which are available in their own when they tell their own story, how they sometimes get further and further into the groups which the online groups largely which publicize those conspiracy theories. I think I'm right in saying that there's sometimes a sense of kind of suspension of judgment. So they suspend their own epistemic judgment and increasingly go along with what the group says. So that might be regarded as a factor which is external to epistemic considerations. Might help there.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you both for this exchange. I have myself on the list, but I'm very happy to yield the floor if somebody else wants to jump in. Well, apparently not, but think about.
I want some tough questions about the technical details then.
Oh no, that's not going to be me. I have a very well, actually, so I'm very happy to see every time you present, you have like the view gets even more complex and like more interesting and stuff. And so it's really nice to see that, although I don't know much about these things, I have to say. I want to ask something which now I realize I'm not exactly sure how to formulate it, but my impression was, so you're giving this story about bringing in Hume and starting from skepticism, and then you say, well, we have to live our lives, blah blah blah. Nature takes its course, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of practical stuff at issue. Like there's a lot of practical matters at issue. We have to survive, and so on and so forth. And then so that you combine that with the purely epistemic, as it were, and then you bring in this third dimension of the morality of it all, like harmful beliefs and so on and so forth. And so I wasn't. So it seems to me that I don't think I see in this picture that you give. So your advice is basically let's be metacognitively sensitive. No, the other one, sensible, right? Sensible. So that involves paying attention to all these three types of norms: epistemic and practical and moral, as it were. but it wasn't like really clear to me in this picture, why is there any need, or I don't know if need is the word, but like how you kind of justify the epistemic, obeying the epistemic norms, because assuming you're a, you know, this kind of conspiracy theorist, there's a lot of stake for you practically, and bracket for a moment the moral stuff, right? Just bracket it for a moment. Assume like there's a lot at stake for you practically. So why do I have to reason epistemically correct? Like why do I have to, you know, have true beliefs and so on and so forth? And I don't know. I'm not sure even if certainty plays any role. But like these people, they survive. They have probably some of them comfortable lives, right? I'm assuming that there's all kinds of assumptions here that okay, they can't have only false beliefs. That's impossible. Like, you know, you have a majority of true beliefs, but on top of that, there's a bunch of crazy beliefs that you can put, and so you will have like, you know, practically viable life or something like that, or flourishing life and so forth. And then so no, and then the moral part. Well, I mean, of course, the problem with that is that they don't see it as morally wrong, right, from inside, and then changing their minds about that seems to me to be even harder than changing their minds about the content of the beliefs they have, right? But you know, forget about that part for the moment. So I guess basically the question is like, what's the incentive in this picture that you're presenting to keep being a epistemically responsible agent, or you know, a metacognitively sensible agent in for this kind of situation that you're talking about? I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but
I think so, but I'm not sure how to answer, because so you are searching for some kind of motivation that is useful for the agents themselves, right? Because I mean, otherwise the motivation for holding holding the epistemic norms is because this is an epistemic notion, right? So this is the believing and feeling certain. These are epistemic things. I mean, they, you know, their role is to have correct representation of reality. So we have them. So yeah, basically we have them in our brains because that's how our brains were constructed, right? I mean, they evolved obviously this way. So this is, let's say, biological need of our brains to have representations of reality that are accurate. Now your question is, yeah, but sure, but they do have such representations about food and about, you know, other things.
I'm saying they survive very well without having those true beliefs about the, you know, the stuff that they believe. Of course, they have that's based on I'm assuming that's kind of like the usual picture. You know, you have to get some things right to get some other things wrong, right?
Yeah,
but otherwise, like
sure, but then I don't see the problem, because basically they can live very well with having crazy beliefs, right? And then basically the prudential or practical pressure is, I mean, they have more of a need in that domain.
Exactly.
Which basically overcomes their need of any epistemic accuracy with these beliefs in this case, which for which reason they end up continuing to have these strange beliefs. So I don't see a problem.
Yeah, so exactly. So I think that's what I was going for. But then, you know, there might be some resistance from, well, but what about the epistemic? Are we, because it seems that, you know, you kind of like letting these people go a bit too easily, right? If you just like put all the pressure, or you kind of like justify all this behavior from the practical part, and then the purely epistemic kind of like, you know, gets out of the picture because the practical stuff takes over. Again, bracketing the moral issues. And so the question would be like, well, what about, I mean, there's something inherently wrong epistemically about people holding these beliefs. But if you kind of like excuse the behavior just from the practical, I mean, not excuse, but you know, if you put all the crucial part done by the practical stuff, then the worry is like the epistemic thing that just flows out of the window. I don't know. Maybe you don't share this worry.
I understand, I think, where you come from, but what I want to be adamant about is that, you know, this is indeed the case. What we do in these sort of cases, we treat them badly. I mean, we let them judge them poorly because they don't follow the epistemic norms. But at the same time, if they don't do any harm and, you know, their attitudes are practically useful for them and they are, you know, as I said, morally benign, then I think that people usually have this attitude. Look, this guy doesn't do any harm. Let him be, you know. Otherwise, I mean, so let him be. Usually, it's a he, right? In the sense of, you know, let him continue hold these beliefs because it's good for him. But otherwise, I continue to have poor epistemic evaluations of his position, right? So I continue to think that he's not in the right and he's very poor epistemic agent. So I continue to think that I don't let him go from an epistemic point of view. I just think that, you know, we tend to treat people who don't do no harm less harshly than people that, besides you know, trashing all epistemic norms, they also do harm with their attitudes. I think this is just a datum. So obviously, I also need to back up my claim here with some empirical studies. But I think, yeah, this is
okay, no, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes. Okay. I'll stop. And any other questions, please, if you have.
Please, any questions. So don't feel shy. Anything about anything. Just throw with arguments towards me. Maurizio, done?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, please, sorry.
I have only one simple question, on kind of explanatory question. So how can we show to dogmatists that their beliefs are dangerous while these beliefs are at the same time useful? So for example, if I think about the function of conspiracy theories, for example, entertainment function or function or signaling function of conspiracy theories. So how can I show to the dogmatists that these beliefs are dangerous, but while at the same time these beliefs are useful for them? I don't know if I explain well my question.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one because yeah, basically from the inside, that's why that's why they end up with this, right? Because they think it's okay, it's perfectly right, and it's difficult to show people that this is the case. So probably what Socrates would also say is, and other smart people, is that they should come to the realization that this is harmful. How to do that? Obviously, only through dialogue, I think. So I present my arguments for why this might be harmful, and in this humane way, try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's from that disadvantaged community, for example, right? And with having this dialogue, I think people just. So the problem with the current debates usually is that quite often people get super polarized because they don't accept to get into this type of dialogues, and they just quite often think that their position is the correct one and the other person is just stupid. So if you try to to discuss about this and appeal to empathy and to sympathy, as Hume said, that's the only way. You cannot prove to somebody that this is wrong. You can just have dialogue. And obviously, given that these are moral issues, they're quite difficult, right? So quite often it's rather difficult to say which is the correct, the moral thing to do. Quite often, and then obviously you don't have perfect knowledge of that, so you have dialogue. That's the tool. That's the tool I would appeal always. Keep talking to each other and try to understand each other, and obviously try to understand ourselves. I know it was a very poor answer, but I don't have much more to say.
Maybe we cannot convince them all. So, for example, we have to give up at some point. And I don't know. I was thinking about in the cases of conspiracy theories when they perform a function of signaling. So, for example, to believe in a conspiracy theories gives me the possibility to know, for example, other person that share the same beliefs or the same world's view, I can say. And so for me, it's useful to believe about, for example, flat Earth conspiracy theories, because I have the possibility to share my ideas with other person, to know other communities, to begin also my social life, for example, in some extreme cases. So I don't know, it is possible to convince them all, or is it a real problem? I don't know.
So
thanks in advance.
I'll give you a very concrete example, and it is about the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's a very hot topic, and I have a very close friend who's very attached to this topic, and he's not here, but yeah, no, he's not here. No, and quite often when you get to this point where you're talking contradictory about a topic that is so sensitive, you realize that a bridge is maybe to actually talk about the emotional background. So why do I have this position? Because I'm afraid. I mean, I'm just afraid of a nuclear war, right? So let's talk about that. I mean, let's talk about the emotions that are actually, the cause of your position. And when you get to that, in my experience, right, with this friend of mine who's very close and nice friend of mine, when we got to that point, it was much easier to discuss about these things, and people just change their opinion. It's extremely interesting when you get to this kind of discussion where you get to talk about emotions and about the emotional roots and desires and needs of people. When it comes to this kind of discussions, you actually get some ground, cover some ground, and you might also loosen up a bit with some of your positions. So yeah.
Okay, thanks both. So we have two more questions. Alexandra first.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation. I learned a lot. I have to say I don't have a philosophy background at all, so forgive the ignorance of maybe some of my observations. I was wondering to what extent, if at all, do you engage with fields like affect theory or the politics of affects? And because I noticed you used interchangeably the terms of affects and emotion, I was wondering whether you're familiar with scholars like Brian Masumi who make the distinction between the two, and whether if you think that what you call the EFs are emotions or rather affects following that distinction. I'm not very familiar with it myself. I know it's done. So yeah, maybe that's a future direction for inquiry. Thank you.
Thanks. I do make those distinctions. So I rather talked loosely tonight, but yeah, obviously. So there are affects. This is like the general category, and then there are different types of affects, like sentiments, moods, emotions, feelings. And what I do argue for is that this epistemic, what I call the toxicity epistemic feelings, they are emotions, and in their case, I argue for why they are, emotions, not moods, not sentiments. But yeah, I mean, now I was while answering to questions, I talked about other trust as being an affect, obviously, which it is, but then you obviously want to be more precise about the relation between different emotions and feelings and moods, and yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Xiaopo, apologies for possibly butchering your name.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm curious about what would you have to say about some knowledge in social science. So because this kind of things are usually intertwined with ethics or emotions or things like that. I have the feeling that the dogmatic in natural science is sometimes more harmless, unless we're talking about climate change. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter whether you believe the Earth is flat or not. It doesn't really matter, in our political life, for example. But when we talk about something like minimum incomes and things like this, about things in social science, I think it can be more, well, yeah, it will have a larger influence if we move into some beliefs in social science. So yeah, just I don't know how to phrase my question very well, but just curious about your thought about it. Thanks.
I think, sorry, thank you very much. So, and also thank you for staying for, I think it's already 12 o'clock in Taiwan now. So thank you very much.
It's midnight now, so I really can do it well. So.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a difference in that I mean, the topics of social sciences quite often are very personal, right? They touch us, as you said. So I think it makes sense for people in social science to be more influenced, I suppose, by their ideological leanings and so on. Although, and I want to emphasize this, there are people, for example, in super abstract. I mean, I don't know physics that well, or physicians or physicists, or people from natural sciences that well. But I know people from philosophy who do very abstract things that don't touch any topics from practical philosophy, and nevertheless they end up being so stubborn and so angry and so emotional. And you sometimes think, oh, come on, like, how could you get angry because of a theory of property from metaphysics? And come on, why would you be so passionate about that? I mean, so quite often.
Well, your job depends on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, I would never think that somebody would change their mind, no matter how good the counter evidences are, if they are to defend their thesis, right? I mean, of course you will not change, right? This is come on, this is a thesis. I mean, you have to do it in order to earn a degree and then earn some money. So, anyhow, I think it can be the same in physical sciences as well. Although, yeah, surely in natural science, in social sciences, is probably more often because of the topics. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We have yet another question. Laura, please.
Hi. I was thinking about your three steps heuristic, and that you start with step one, accepting skepticism. I think this might be quite like the end of the journey for most people, not the starting point. And the philosophical argument of the brain in a vat might be very, I don't know, even if maybe it's sound, maybe it's too artificial for most people to just accept it as like a premise that, okay, we don't know anything because we cannot prove that we're not the brain in a vat. And maybe you can start this step by going into something like psychology or neuroscience and explain that, like, we cannot be sure about anything because, like, the latest theories say that we have like our perception is, I don't know, controlled hallucination or predictive processing, stuff like that. I don't know if like this stands, but you could go into more like scientific arguments for skepticism, I'd say, because like just philosophically it sounds too dry.
I totally agree with you. I think, first of all, obviously this is the part of the way you sell the whole thing. So if you want to really be useful, you obviously want to sell this. And yeah, it's a bit strange to sell it by talking about the metrics. Come on, so you want me to buy that first and then do your strategy? I can't. So yeah, definitely when it comes to
it's like you're starting by, of course we don't know anything, but we can't help thinking that our hands are like we have hands. So we have like, there's a journey to getting there, or end like that. I don't know. It's like an argument in itself.
Yeah, sure. So what I do usually, and in my thesis as well, I don't provide only Descartes' argument. Also, actually, my favorite skeptical argument is the one from the threshold problem. I don't know if you know about it. And Lawrence Bonjour, for example, talks about it, and I think it's very good. Basically, the idea is that I know I don't want to get into detail. I will probably bore people with it, but generally, knowledge needs ultimate level of justification, and we rarely get that. And in order to define what other threshold might be the case, you have a bit of a problem deciding where the threshold is, right? How much justification do we need for knowledge? And then there is this argument that no threshold is rigorous enough and not ad hoc, except the highest type of justification, right? So that's one type of argument that I like personally. But also, there are many arguments from cognitive science, obviously from the literature on cognitive biases, and I think they are brought up quite more often recently. For example, there is this new literature on political epistemology about how voters are influenced by cognitive bias, and how I think we talked about this, about how basically we are constantly in the wrong because of all sorts of cognitive biases, right? And for example, Michael Hannon has this paper in which he talks about why more knowledge for voters is worse for voting habits, which I think is a very interesting thesis, right? So, and he brings up all these studies from psychology about how people use motivated reasoning. And yes, I mean, sure, let's bring all of that. Let's talk about motivated reasoning. Let's talk about all these experiments in which people end up holding beliefs because they are wrongly motivated, not because they have good evidence. What I do believe that is needed is to be aware that there is surely something wrong with how you form your belief. Because if you don't start from that, if you think that, look, we do have knowledge, but only some people lack it because they are stupid. Most often, I mean, 90% of people would say, "Oh yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. I do possess knowledge. My feeling of certainty is legitimate, epistemically speaking." So I do believe that the skeptical step is needed. What I agree with you is how you sell it, because it's very difficult to sell it. But I think Hume would agree also with me that you need the skeptical step. Without the skeptical step, the thing doesn't work. Because from the inside, it just feels natural to feel certain about this or that. Yeah, how you sell it, yes, that's how I had a very long monologue about different arguments, but yeah, it's still a huge task.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So any other questions or remarks or comments? So Bettina made a couple of remarks in the chat. Sergiu, if you want to have a look and maybe comment.
Oh, yes.
But meanwhile, other people can ask their questions if they have any.
Yeah, I agree with Bettina.
Okay, so I'm going to ask another question, and please. Again, this is probably going to be very a little bit off the mark or something like that. I was a bit when you started when you started like with the human story and how nature takes course and all that, takes its course, and basically see your friends if you don't want to get depressed and stuff like that. I'm assuming, and I think you also mentioned some experimental work on this feeling of feeling of confidence or certainty, or was it confidence, I guess, no? That is nature's way, in a way, of saying stop the inquiry, and go on with your life or something like that. Is it the case that does this thing exclude a possible purely fictional character that says, look, I am perfectly aware that none of these feelings, even if they have them, right, they have nothing to do with the epistemic standing of my beliefs. They're just there because nature does this to humans, and so they go on living their life, but they're still somehow never prone to saying, well, because I have this feeling of certainty, my epistemic world is in order or something like that. Is that a possibility in this picture? Or I mean, I don't even know if it makes sense, but because it seems to me that it seems to me, well, it's conceivable, presumably, because I just described it to you or something. But I don't know. What do you think about that kind of character? If it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, yeah, sure. I think again it goes back to your previous question as well about what this.
I probably just misunderstand your whole view. So.
No. Come on.
I'm just being modest. Did you just teach me that?
Of course, you need some social praise, obviously. No, so what I want to say is that basically the role of belief is epistemic, right? So I mean, it is by nature. That's why we have these mental attitudes, because we have these epistemic needs, right? So it's kind of encapsulated in the very concept of. I mean, if it wasn't that, then it would have been some other mental state. I mean, obviously, what type of mental state is, it depends on the function that it has. So presumably, obviously, you are right in saying that we can imagine somebody who has some kind of boxes that are used for beliefs, and they are used in this and that way. But I mean, for us humans, and presumably for other animals as well, this type of representations in our brains exist precisely because we want to have boxes that we represent the world and we take to be true. And then if that is the case, then I think my picture applies. So basically, I'm saying that this works for us human species and whatever.
Yeah. No, I get it. Sure, of course. Yeah. That makes sense. That does make sense. I was just trying to push it a little bit. Okay, I'll stop now. Any other questions, remarks in the audience? Or if not,
pretty late, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's getting a bit late, but anyway, let me thank all of you for being here. This has been wonderful for us, and I invite you to come in the future as well. We have our website and we have the Facebook page, so get connected to that. And so let's not leave without thanking Sergiu again. So thanks a lot, Sergiu, and hopefully I'll see you as well in the future.
And thanks a lot for coming and for these wonderful questions. I really appreciate it. I wish you a great, wonderful weekend and see you soon, maybe.
All right. Bye. Ciao.